a little bit of an overview of how some of the issues tend to change developmentally over time as children age. Now, I want to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the emotional issues that siblings have to confront. And I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. And I'm just seeing as some of you, I guess, begin to post them. Okay. One of the emotions I mentioned was confusion. And, hey, sorry, get off the silly dog. One of the emotions I mentioned was confusion. And children are very likely to express confusion, and I think what that underscores is one of the most important things is that children, non-disabled SIBs, above all, need information. And they need information that's going to be really clear and at a level they can understand. You know, children with their siblings with disabilities may display behaviors that are very confusing to them. They may have odd mannerisms, they may talk differently, they may learn differently, they may move differently. And around age 6, SIBs begin to recognize these differences. They begin to recognize, hey, they're not like me, or I'm not like them. And that's a really important age where lots of basic and clear and honest information is needed. Often SIBs also find the whole process very confusing when they're young. Many siblings have told me what contributed to their confusion is that they felt, even if they were the younger brother or younger sister, they felt like they were older. Often they developed capabilities much faster, so they were reading better or speaking better or behaving more appropriately than their older brother or sister who had the disability. And that can certainly lead to feelings of confusion, being the younger one, but actually feeling as though you're older. Another common emotional response I'll talk a little bit more about is anger. It's really important to recognize that anger is a healthy emotion and is an acceptable emotion, and we don't want to tell siblings that they're not allowed to feel angry. Now, we do want SIBs to be able to express anger appropriately and in acceptable ways, but it really is okay for children, young brothers and sisters, to feel angry. Younger aged children, usually their anger tends to be associated with more concrete things, such as getting less attention, or the extra time that's devoted to their brother or sister, or the time all the times they're dragged to other doctor's appointments or physical therapists or occupational therapists. They may resent being dragged around like that just to tag along with their brother or sister. They may also resent or feel angry about the inconvenience of a disabled brother's or sister's symptoms or behaviors. For older children, anger often relates to, why do I have to have more responsibility? Why do you treat me differently? Why does he get away with this or she get away with that, but you hold me to a different standard or a higher standard? As children age, anger and resentment often relates to having to accommodate certain behaviors or tolerate certain behaviors, and to having greater responsibility. Many children have told me, siblings, that they get fed up with their brother or sister's repeated questions or certain behaviors that just don't go away. I know we're not focusing tonight on any one particular disabling condition. However, one condition that I have a lot of expertise with and that I work a lot with happens to be the autism spectrum. And many normally developing siblings will just tell me, I get so fed up. My brother asks the same questions over and over, or if I touch a Lego, or if I move anything, he screams, and then everyone's upset with me. when I'm just behaving in a typical way, or kids will tell me we can't go to the movies because my brother and my sister, they'll want to get up and make strange noises or flap their hands, or they'll be covering their ears. It's awareness of these differences, and having to put up with the inconvenience and tolerate these behaviors can really, create a lot of intense feelings for typically developing SIBs. Another important emotion that children tend to have is anxiety. Younger children are most often anxious about themselves. For instance, they may think, this difference, this disability my brother or sister has, do I have it too? Or can I catch it? Older children tend to focus more on what others are beginning to think, especially their peers. And they may be very, have a lot of conflicted and very ambivalent about including their sibling who has a disability, say in neighborhood play or with other children. And they may have a lot of anxiety, even mixed with embarrassment, as they begin to focus on what other children think. Okay. Another feeling is guilt. Guilt is a tricky one. Many children tell me that they feel guilty and bad, not as if they've caused their brother or sister to have a disability, but they feel guilty about their own feelings about it. If they have angry feelings, or if they feel ashamed or feel embarrassed, many children say they feel guilty about even feeling that way, even though those are very normal emotions. And they feel a need to somehow be more perfect. Many children at some point may feel angry or ashamed or embarrassed, and may even express feelings like, I don't really want this brother, I don't really want this sister. It's really important to reassure children if they have feelings of that type. We don't want children to be racked with guilt. Okay, where should we go from here? I want to talk not just about identifying some of the different issues and feelings, but I also want to talk about how do we help siblings, and how do we help siblings cope, and how do we help them remain positive and have healthy self-esteem. Okay, so I'm going to run through some of what I think are the most important things to do. I think one of the most important things of all is that we provide age-appropriate information and education. It's absolutely critical to match the information to the child's developmental level. So you want the information to be age-appropriate. For example, with young children, say ages 5 to 6, you want to keep the information quite concrete. Certainly, 5 to 6-year-olds are capable of understanding, oh, your brother or sister has a hard time with certain things, or they have special needs. They can't do this yet as well as you can. But it's also important to point out that your brother or sister maybe has an easy time with other things. They might also have some special talents. One thing that's impressed me when I've been working with many families is what an amazing job families do of helping siblings internalize positive feelings about their disabled brother or sister. And that's really important, because there is a risk or a danger that the positives can be overshadowed, because very often there may be negative things which feel very large and enormous, both to young children and their parents. This issue, it's not unique in autism. It's really, I think, part of the territory of any kind of disability. So I think it's so important for parents to make a conscious effort to identify positive attributes in a child that has some kind of challenge, at the same time that we acknowledge the need to cope with the more difficult aspects of a disability. I think this is especially crucial because many children, they will just not do this on their own. Children are not necessarily going to focus on positives independently. So we need to be conscious, I think, as parents, to be sure that we talk about the good things, the child with the disability. What are their positive contributions to the family? What are the funny things they do? And it's often not too difficult for most families to somehow find humor in their child's situation. I think it's a real blessing when parents are somehow able to remain upbeat and respond to the children and family with humor and enthusiasm, even when there's bound to be challenging times and difficult times. Those lighter moments and feeling like you're together as a family in a positive way are really important. Now, as siblings grow a bit older, say between ages 8 and 10, they're often ready for broader and more detailed information. That's really important because we do need to carefully provide more detailed information. SIBs need to know what is the nature of this disability. For example, what's autism? What's cerebral palsy? What's cystic fibrosis? What does that mean? What's different about my brother or sister? How do they learn? How will they play with friends? What are their interests? How will they relate to people? It's very important to give much more detailed information. Children also are going to need assistance with how do I tell others, like my friends, about my brother or sister? How do I tell them about their autism or about their learning disability? These are just some of the issues that I think are really important to cover with siblings. For many siblings that I've worked with, as they gain in knowledge, they also gain in confidence. As they learn the language to explain to peers or others, this is my brother or sister, they have autism, or they have a hearing impairment, and this is what we do to help them, and this is what they're good at, and this is what they have more trouble with. And as children gain that language, it's empowering. And also, children who have the language and the capacity to provide information to others, they feel less worried and embarrassed. Once children feel like they know a lot about their brother and sister and that they can explain it to others, they definitely feel more confident and less anxious and more empowered. Okay, what's another way to help children, the siblings? The next broad thing I'd like to talk about is what I call acknowledging feelings and promoting communication. As we give information to children, it's absolutely critical to be open to acknowledging their feelings honestly. So often, providing factual information and discussing information with children can lead children to open up and communicate their feelings. So it's really, really critical to promote honest and open communication. It's very important for children to have that opportunity to open up. But this does require that a family not be stuck in denial. If a family really feels that they have to I'm sorry, I have a Okay, sorry about that break. There was something happening here in the background. Okay, I was talking about acknowledging feelings and promoting communication. And I was saying that promoting communication and honest discussion is really critical. And I think I was talking about families who might experience some denial or the need to pretend that everything is normal and everything is fine. I don't think that's often a very good idea for children. Non-disabled siblings, what they tell me is they know things aren't quote-unquote normal. They know there's a difference in their family if they have a brother or sister with a disability. And they feel really resentful when parents are trying hard to keep up a pretense or pretend that everything is just normal or no different than anyone else. It's better to face it head on. In my experience, it can actually alleviate anxiety when parents discuss things openly and honestly with SIBs in a developmentally appropriate way. And I think this also helps them to feel more positively about their brother and sister and about their role as a brother or sister. Now, it looks like a lot of questions are being posted, and I do want to also make time to address some of those questions. I'm not sure if I mentioned a number of years ago, I've worked with a lot of families and a lot of siblings. A number of years ago, I actually wrote a book for siblings who have a brother or sister with a high-functioning autism spectrum disorder, such as high-functioning autism or Asperger's. And what that book actually grew out of was my experience working with a family where the older brother had high-functioning autism, and the younger sister, who was developing completely typically, obviously did not, and she was really starved for information. This was about, I guess about 8 years ago when this book was now published. I think it was 2001. And at that point in time, there wasn't the same explosion of books that are on the market that we have now addressing high-functioning autism and expressing Asperger's syndrome. Now there's just so many books about Asperger's syndrome. There's just been an explosion of writing and exploration in that area. But back then, when this child came in to see me, we really couldn't find a book to help her understand her brother. And we looked, and eventually, most of the books really focused on more impaired children with classic autism. So eventually what I decided to do with her, this was in therapy, it's a therapeutic exercise, I didn't intend to write a book, was I told her, her name was Emily, that we were going to write, I was going to help her write her own story. And I would provide the informational part, and she would recount all of her experiences in the emotional part to help her master some of her feelings about her brother, in addition to giving her a lot of good accurate information about high-functioning autism. So we spent, a good number of sessions, and she drew the pictures, and we did this little storybook, and it was about 12 pages, and with pictures. And her parents came for a session. I read it with, and Emily and I read it to the parents. And it was just an unbelievably moving session. We all actually, I think, ended up crying. And her mother remarked, wow, something like this could help a lot of people. And that's how this book really began. And then much later, I went back to the family and I just asked her permission to do a lot further interviewing with them and their son and Emily, and flushed this out into a book that could be helpful for children. And the book is called, I'll show it to you, it's called Autism Through a Sister's Eyes. And it really covers a lot of the kinds of emotional responses that we've been talking about tonight. And these are really told from the first-person perspective of Emily, who at the time that I was working on this was 9, going on 10. And she was so articulate in talking about feeling worried and the difficult feelings and learning to cope and dealing with changes and feeling embarrassed. It was, and this is still available through Future Horizons, which is a publishing company which is dedicated to autism and Asperger's. Just mentioning it for those of you out there who may want to know more about it. But as I got to know Emily and her family very well through this process, it helped me understand in a very personal way what some of the qualities are that help siblings and help families in a very positive way with this whole process. One thing that impressed me about this particular family was their sense of humor. They never lost their ability to laugh, their ability to enjoy each other, and their ability to celebrate their son who had the disability, their son's uniqueness. And they worked hard to structure a special role for him. He liked Disney. He liked to recite commercials. So they made skits and they made commercials, and Emily did this with him, and it really promoted a lot of ways for them to interact and built the sibling bonds. Another thing that was very important, I think, and important to Emily's identity as she grew older, was the fact that having a sibling with a disability really taught her strength and compassion in a way that perhaps some of her peers didn't come to as easily. She had to develop strength and compassion. It was part of her daily life. And I think that became an extremely important part of her identity, which I think was important for the parents to emphasize. And it's something that I think over time she felt very, very good about. Okay. Let me see. I know about 20 more minutes. I know there's a lot of questions. I know I've talked a lot tonight about the importance of providing children information so they don't make incorrect assumptions. Information helps SIBs and children put things in perspective. I do want to talk a little bit more about another type of sibling concern, and that's planning for the future. Planning for the future raises a lot of important issues for any family of a child with a disability. And, you know, the reality is, as children age, non-disabled siblings are going to have lives and often families of their own. And then they face sometimes unusual and additional responsibilities because of their unique relationship with their brother or sister with a disability. I think the bottom line here is it's very important to help a sibling who has a disability achieve the fullest level of independence possible. And this starts very young, having them do everything they can independently for themselves that they're able to do. And I think this extends into adulthood. However, I think it's also very important to involve social supports, which might mean involving setting up trusts, involving other agencies, involving respite care, having a plan that spreads any responsibility for caring for a disabled sibling among SIBs or among family members and extended family, developing financial plans for future care. It's also important, I think, to know your state's laws regarding both guardianship and independence. I think it's important to assume that you can't just assume, oh, I'll make this person guardian or that person will become guardian. It will happen automatically. It's very important to actually know the laws. It's also very important for non-disabled to know where can they access educational, vocational, or medical records, or what's necessary to meet their disabled siblings' needs. Okay. And I guess the other important thing is for a family to, as much as possible, to be hooked into community resources. There's wonderful community resources out there in most areas, and I think for young children, for instance, SIB Shops, it's a wonderful resource. SIB Shops offers groups and small structured group classes that focus specifically on the typically developing siblings and give them a chance to meet other siblings and work through and express what they're experiencing and feeling. I think SIB Shops is a very important program, actually a very useful program. There's a number of other programs as well and other sibling networks. I have a resource list. I know it's hard to write things down when you're just listening in this kind of a talk, but I will mention a few other organizations. One is called the Sibling Information Network. It's based in New York, and it has a subgroup called Siblings for Significant Change. Another important group, I think, is the Parent Advocacy Coalition for Educational Rights. That's kind of like a parents helping parents kind of program. There's another program called the Sibling Support Project, and that's been based in Seattle, Washington at the Children's Hospital Medical Center. Another important source of information. There's also magazines and newsletters specifically devoted to sibling issues. One of those is called The Bond. It's a quarterly newsletter. It's generally intended for siblings and adult children of individuals who are mentally disabled with mental illness. But that's a wonderful newsletter. There's a magazine for parents of children with disabilities, published 12 times a year, called The Exceptional Parent. It's published, I think, by PsycEd Corporation. NASP newsletter. That's a newsletter for service providers. It's available from the National Association of Sibling Programs, or the Sibling Support Project, the one I mentioned before in Washington. One other publication, the Sibling Information Network newsletter, and that's actually a newsletter for siblings published quarterly. and it's available for the Sibling Information Network out of Connecticut. Okay, so I did want to call your attention to at least a few resources. Before I conclude and try to address a few questions, I wanted to just list a few strategies that non-disabled siblings themselves have suggested for parents to consider when they are interacting with non-disabled with their own non-disabled children. Many siblings have suggested the following to parents. So in their sibs' own words, be open and honest, limit the caregiving responsibilities of siblings, or at least spread them around so they're fair and equal. Use respite care and supportive services, accept the disability, schedule special time with the non-disabled sibling. Let siblings, to whatever extent they can, settle their own differences. Welcome other children and friends into the home. Praise all siblings. For parents to recognize that they are the most important, most powerful teachers of their children. Listen to siblings. Involve all siblings in family events and decisions. Require the disabled child to do as much for himself or herself as possible. Recognize each child's unique qualities and family contribution. Recognize special stress times for sibs and plan to minimize negative effects. Use professionals when indicated to help siblings. Teach siblings to interact. Provide opportunities for a normal family life and normal family activities. And join sibling-related organizations. Okay.
She's going to read some of the questions that I asked before. So
Okay.
they'll pop up shortly.
Well, can you explain to me what's popping up and how I should address them? Okay. So I'm going to look at some of these questions, and we're going to try to...
Here in this area, the questions will come up, and then you can just...
Are these questions, or are these comments, or what are these?
That would just be a comment.
Okay.
Well, see, the questions from the beginning that were there before are about to come up now.
Okay.
See how they come up. Some of them may be comments.
Sorry about that phone interruption. I called to tell her not to call her.
No, that's fine.
I was so cute. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to address a few of these questions here. I'll read the question first so everyone will know what question I'm trying to address, and then I'll try to make some comments. My 12-year-old daughter is embarrassed by her 10-year-old brother who has Asperger syndrome. Okay. Well, I guess the first thing to say about that, boy, is your 12-year-old not alone. That is a really, really common problem and common issue. After all, the behavior of a lot of children with Asperger's can be really embarrassing, and around age 10, that's when children are really starting to want to be accepted by their peers and value their opinions. There's a great little book out by a woman, Catherine Lord, that might be great for your 10-year-old or your 12-year-old who's the older one, who does not have Asperger's. It's called Rules. I don't know if you've heard of it, by Catherine Lord. And it's specifically about a sibling who's embarrassed by her brother who has Asperger's or high-functioning autism. So she constructs very specific rules that he has to follow so he won't embarrass her. And probably your 12-year-old will enjoy that. In terms of helping her with her feelings of embarrassment, I think it's very important to let her know that it's really okay that she feels embarrassed, and it's really pretty normal, and to give her the language to explain to others, particularly others that matter to her, why her brother acts that way. Knowledge is powerful. She's able to say, well, my brother laughs really loud like that because he has Asperger's syndrome, and that has to do with the way his brain works, and he's not trying to upset us and trying to look that way. He can't help it. That's just the way he laughs. Having those words is really important and powerful. So I think the best way to fight that embarrassment is to arm your 12-year-old with a good understanding and the knowledge, and to provide her time away from her brother with her friends, to try to give her some times when her younger brother is not intruding. Okay, I'll talk about the next question. How do we help our children interact with each other? Well, that's a very broad question. I think families who have normally developing sibs struggle also how to have their children interact with each other without beating each other up and abusing each other sometimes. I know my children often really will fight like cats and dogs. However, I think when you have a child with a disability, if the interactions aren't occurring naturally in a positive way, we have to structure them. What do I mean by structure them? We have to look for designing some type of time-limited, structured activity that both can somehow participate in. If you have a child who's severely disabled, then part of that activity might be you might have to choose very carefully, and part of the activity may actually have to be may have to be parallel, where the disabled child does it parallel with the other sibling. But structuring something that's positive, that both can enjoy sometimes, whether it's an outing or whether it's one child helping the other child, constructing the Legos in a certain way or playing in a certain way, you want to give the non-disabled sibling a positive role. If you help them find a positive role, that's the best springboard for those interactions to grow. Okay, next question. Our 6-year-old wishes that his 4-year-old autistic brother was a brother he could play with. Wait a minute, I just lost your question. I have to hit this arrow, don't I? Hang on here. Okay. Our 6-year-old wishes that his 4-year-old autistic brother was a brother he could play with, although he has more understanding than he did previously. Okay. Well, again, those are really, really smart and normal feelings. For a 6-year-old to wish he could play with his 4-year-old autistic brother is really showing some caring and compassion and some insight. So my question, I guess, would be to continue to provide to your 6-year-old a lot of information about autism and to help him figure out, well, in what way can you play with your brother? I think it's fair to be honest and to acknowledge that, no, you can't play with your 4-year-old brother perhaps the way some of your friends can play with their non-disabled 4-year-old brothers. It's best to be honest about that. But let's figure out what you can do. Does the 4-year-old brother, I don't know where he is on the autism spectrum, but does he like trains? Can you, do the wooden trains together? Does he like water? Can they conjointly do water play? You have to, does he like clay? Does he like sensory activities? Is he into gross motor activities? You have to find an area for commonality if it's at the same time that you acknowledge those feelings. Parents, when they have a child with a disability, do go through a grieving process. They go through the process of grieving the expectation or the wish that they had for a typically developing child. I think siblings can go through a period of loss and grieving too. They can have very strong emotions. Okay, let me try to take another question. My 15-year-old gets jealous with my son. It's a little hard for me to address because I don't know how old the son is. If the son is a much, much younger child, again, I think I would acknowledge for 15-year-old the feelings of jealousy. I would try to set schedule some separate time for that 15-year-old, whether it's, some separate activities, going out to lunch, having a special date with mom. I would talk about those jealous feelings. I would probably, for a 15-year-old, you don't want to dictate to them. You want to negotiate with them. You don't want it to be a monologue. You want it to be a dialogue. So I would ask them, what can we do differently that's going to allow you to feel less jealous, to feel included, to feel. I think it's very important to include a teenager in particular in that kind of dialogue. Let's see here. Next question. My son, sounds like the son has autism, doesn't have friends of his own, but wants to play with his sister's friends. That's a good question. It causes tension in our house, and I don't want to refuse the girls from having friends over. Okay. That's a great question. And again, that's not an uncommon situation. I think you're absolutely right. You don't want to refuse your goals from having their friends over. Part of them having a good childhood is not being restricted from having friends come to play. But you have to, I think, strike a middle ground in terms of the degree to which you let your son, since he doesn't have friends of his own, interact and play with his sister's friends. It's only fair to a sister or sisters, I guess, that you structure things so they have some time without their brother intruding. Now, I know that takes work on the part of the parent, right? It would be nice if we could just have them all go off together. But that's one of the things I think that we have to struggle with and try to accept when we're raising a child who has a disability or differences. The sisters in the family, the girls, they need to have some time where they can play just as typical kids of whatever age they are with their friends. But it needs to be balanced. You need to let them know, well, you have so much time just to do your own thing with your friends, but perhaps for a short amount of time, and we'll decide when that will be, you can include him, and maybe they can include him in more neutral things like eating a snack. Maybe even some of her friends would be interested in his autism, since if they're from a family that does not have a child with a disability, and your daughters could take the role of teaching their friends about it and helping them kind of help the younger child. That might turn out in that way to be quite productive. Okay. One other thing. If the child with autism doesn't have friends with his own, there may be a lot of opportunities in your community to help him get together with other children with autism for recreational opportunities. Most communities have an autism support group or a chapter of the Autism Society of America, and they will have play events and communal events, and that may be very, very helpful for your child with autism to develop his own relationships with other children who also have autism. Okay, next question. Can you provide us with resources, books, videos, other written materials that are interactive that we can use with our siblings? Sure. I think I listed a lot of resources, and I would also recommend a couple of websites if you're looking more for videos. Future Horizons. That's a website definitely does have some interactive things available, such as videos and perhaps some coloring books and DVDs. My book actually has a whole interactive section at the back for kids. It has a whole series of discussion questions for parents to use with their children as a springboard for providing information and exploring feelings. That's definitely an interactive component. Okay. Can you please talk about SIBs 16 or over? Okay. Teenagers 16 or over. I'd be happy to talk about teenagers 16 or over. Many teenagers are facing a pretty developmentally stressful time of their life in and of itself, because they're starting to face the task of defining who they are, identity, kind of striking out on their own, separating from parents. Often tensions are escalating, but they're still a member of the family. So I think it's important to approach them in that way. Many teens will tell me, they'll come in with a complaint, just because I'm the oldest, or just because I'm the teenager and I'm the oldest, I'm saddled with lots and lots and lots of responsibilities that my friends don't have. So I think it's pretty important to remember we don't want to give the teen or the older children all the responsibilities. They can't be the sole helpers of the parents. Again, I think it's very important to spread that around, and for teens to be able to have some, frank discussion about their own concerns, fears, feelings about their sibling with parents. It's very important for older children in particular. Sometimes we tend to think of older children as needing parents left. They just want to be less, just wanting to be off with their friends. in some ways teens need parents more. And I would also schedule time with teenagers just the way you would schedule special playtime or special dates with a younger child, except you may be wanting to do different things. Teenagers may be more preoccupied with questions about their future. What will their role be vis-a-vis a sibling with disabilities? And I think it's pretty important to explore all of those future-related issues I outlined before. But I think the most important thing for older children, such as teens, is going to be the communication. That the communication be open, and that it really be honest and it be there. They're not as concerned with the concrete things in the same way the younger children are. Someone pointed out here that they successfully used ABA to teach their son to play a game which his sister loves. That's a great point. ABA approaches, applied behavioral analysis, can be very helpful in structuring, breaking down to a series of behavioral steps, an activity or a game, so two sibs can engage in it together. ABA is a great way to do that. Breaking anything down to very concrete, ABA probably for children who need it, who have that level of impairment. A lot of modeling. Social skills groups can also be helpful for teaching children with various disabilities better interactional skills that sometimes can carry over to siblings or into the family. Let's see, I have time for a couple more questions. What about jealousy? My 6-year-old is jealous. My 8-year-old gets special attention and rewards. Okay. Well, if your 6-year-old wasn't jealous, I'd probably be worried. The fact that your 6-year-old is jealous means that, one, they're bright, they're observant, they're taking in everything that's going on around them, and that in and of itself is probably a good thing. Again, jealousy is something we don't want a child to hold inside, and if they're expressing their jealousy, you want to help them express that in appropriate or acceptable ways. Again, I think a problem-solving approach is important. What are ways in which you can help your 6-year-old feel that they're also getting special attention and special rewards? Maybe not the same ones that their 8-year-old sibling is receiving, but what are things your 6-year-old is working hard on that you can recognize and reward in special ways so that they feel that they're not getting short shrift but are being equally acknowledged. There's no child that isn't doing something positive that can't be rewarded. So I would set goals with your 6-year-old and choose rewards for your 6-year-old. Because for young children, that's hard to understand. It's harder to understand cognitively for them. They're getting more attention and more rewards. So you do want to find healthy ways in a sense of kind of evening it out. Okay. Can I cut off at 9? Am I supposed to cut off about 9? Okay, I can take another question. Let's see here. My 10-year-old autistic son wants to go and play with all the typical peers he meets, thinking that everyone is his friend. How do we deal with this without making him feel bad? Okay, good question. Your 10-year-old son with autism is going to need some training to learn about boundaries, right? Not that he shouldn't interact with typical peers, but what are appropriate ways to act with typical peers, right? What are the boundaries? What are the physical boundaries, the personal space boundaries? How many questions can you ask? What are the topics that you can ask questions about? I would approach it with a 10-year-old with autism in a very concrete way. I would probably structure it with, with a certain set of what I call quote-unquote rules. What are our rules for playing with other 10-year-olds who don't have autism? We can ask how many questions. What are topics that are not or off limits? How close can we stand? And if you have a 10-year-old who really isn't able to grasp a lot of those things, then you'll play a role in structuring that. You may have to keep the interaction with typical peers fairly brief. And help him know when he has to move on or when he has to stop, because he may not separate on his own. So again, a lot of that will be, that slow process of direct parent teaching. teaching doesn't always have to be done by parents. It can also be done by educators and others. The burden shouldn't all be on parents. I just wanted to point that out also. Okay. My son likes to play with his baby sisters. He is 8, but he doesn't play with kids his own age. Well, I don't know a whole lot about your son, or what kind of, if he has a disability or not, and why he just focuses on the babies and play. But if you have an 8-year-old who's not able to play with children his own age, and he hasn't been identified as having any kind of special need, I certainly would encourage you to speak with your pediatrician about his social development. It might be important for him to have an evaluation. He may need to have participate in kind of social skills training groups or structured play groups. Is he gravitating toward the babies because he enjoys sensory activities, and that's sensory motor activities that the babies are participating in? I think you're going to have to ask yourself some of those kinds of questions. Okay. At what age do we tell a younger sibling about her older brother's autism? Okay. She is 18 months. He is almost 9. Obviously, I realize it wouldn't be any time. I think you mean soon. Yes, an 18-month-old, you're not going to be telling an 18-month-old, imminently about her 9-year-old brother's autism. However, that's an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked that. I really feel it's absolutely paramount at some point when a child is developmentally ready that you do tell them about their older brother's autism or whatever the disabling condition is. And you can start giving children information as young as, 5 or 6. Around age 5 or 6, children start to be able to tell the differences between themselves and others and really start to compare characteristics a little. And by age 5 or 6, it's really okay to start using terms accurately, autism, and talk about, your brother learns differently, or what do you notice differently about your brother? Do you notice, by that age 6, a child will be noticing, if her brother's 9 years older and then her brother would be 15, does he have friendships the way other 15-year-olds have? Does he like similar things to other 15-year-olds? Generally, what I suggest to parents is that in providing information, to some degree, you take your cues from the child. Are they bringing up questions? Are they noticing things? Are they making comments? Those are clues to you that they're ready for information. So there's no one perfect age, but I generally say you start with concrete information around age 5 or 6, and you start providing more detailed information by around ages 8 and 9, and yet more complex information and more focus on peer relationships by age 12. This question is one word, I think. Jealousy. Jealousy and anger. Okay. 2 very powerful emotions. And I think this will probably need to be my last question. So after 5. Okay. Jealousy and emotions, we don't want anyone to hold those in, but we don't want them being expressed in unacceptable ways. So I think it's important to talk about those things. What are the things that are making you angry? What are the things that you're jealous of? Is it over? Want me to keep going?
Skip to the last question.
Oh.
Did you explain it?
Okay. We had the same experience. We were sharing what will we help them? I'm not sure. Someone commented here that they did share with their younger daughters about their older brother's autism as young as 3 or 4. I think that's absolutely great, as long as you put it in really simple, concrete terms. Age 5 or 6, as I said, pretty conservative idea, but you can start as young as 3 and 4, and I think it promotes openness and closeness in the whole family. Done? I'm done. Okay. All right.